Hey guys, no need to jazz it up with an introduction. Chris Jericho. I'll just get right to it. You're world champion wrestler, actor, writer. Now we can talk about you being a producer. You produced the new documentary, I'm Too Old for This Shit, Heavy Metal Fairy Tale. It's out on digital outlets now. Chris, how you doing today?
I am rocking, man.
So, as I mentioned, you are producing the documentary. I got a chance to watch it last week. I really enjoyed it, and it really wasn't what I expected. I kind of went into it thinking like, okay, it's this band that kind of had some notoriety in the 80s, and they're getting another shot, but these guys really didn't ever
No.
have a shot in the first place. So it's kind of weird seeing just the attention that they got and the learning about like the overseas festivals. And it just, it was kind of crazy just to think like, why this band and how did it all come together? And
Well, I mean, the thing about it, like you mentioned, and when people hear about the movie, they go, "I've never heard of Siren," and that's exactly right. Nobody's heard of Siren. You're not supposed to hear of Siren. You could be. I'm the biggest heavy metal fan in the world. I had no idea who Siren was. The reason why I wanted to make this movie is that here's a group of guys that had this band when they were teenagers in high school back in the mid 80s. Like everybody had a band, right? And then as things happen, the band breaks up and they, it's a little bit bitter for them and they put away their instruments and never play again until over 30 years later, when they find out that this demo they made as kids snuck over to Germany, and suddenly there's a huge fan base for Siren that they never knew existed. And they get this invitation to play this really big heavy metal festival. And they're like, we haven't even played our instruments in 30 years. That doesn't happen. Most bands, when they break up as kids, they're done and that's it. But these guys actually had this fan base over there. And when I heard about it, I thought, there's no way. This is either going to be the biggest shit show ever or the greatest heartwarming dreams can come true story that has ever existed. And what I got on camera was even so much more. It's really inspirational. It's a story about how your dreams can come true no matter how old you are and no matter what the circumstances may be.
So one thing that people will find out is they were based out of Brandon, Florida. You live close by.
Yes.
Did you know anything about them at all? Like as you were making it, or
so it's like this. So the drummer, Ed Aborn, is a good friend of mine. And I've known him for 20 years. And I knew that he used to be in a band called Siren when he was a kid. And I used to be in a band called Scimitar when I was a kid. And this guy used to be in a band called this and called that. We never really discussed much about it because, like he said, we never really did anything. So when he approached me and said, hey, man, we just got this call from this festival in Germany. They want Siren to come play and want us to do this because we've got a fan base there. I was like, what are you talking about? Like that doesn't happen. That's impossible. He's like, no, I'm telling you, this guy. I'm like, okay, Ed, listen, I've been in bands playing for 30 years. I've been in Fozzy for 20. I've played all these festivals. It doesn't work that way. And he's like, no, I'm telling you, this guy says we have this fan base. And I was like, okay, I'm going to send a camera crew, the guys that did the Judas video and the last 4 Fozzy videos. And the director's name is Nathan. I said, Nathan, go see what you can find on this. Because it's either going to be just the worst or we're going to catch lightning in a bottle. And it's going to be something that everybody wants to see. And that's basically what happened. Like I said, when I say it's a heavy metal fairy tale, it really is, because stuff like this doesn't happen. But it did happen to these guys, even in their mid 50s. And after all these years, their dream of being, a rock star, so to speak, came true. And whether it's for one weekend or one show or not, that's more than almost anybody can say. And that's where I was like, it doesn't matter if you're a fan of heavy metal or a fan of rock and roll or anything. If you're a fan of a great story about some guys, and they're very likable guys that had this seemingly forgotten dream finally happen, this is the movie that you're going to want to check out.
Yeah, that's one of the most relatable parts of it. Like,
right.
It could happen to anybody. And I'm sure if you go back and think about it, like growing up, whether you were in a band or you were a fan of a particular band, like there's always that local band that you're like, oh yeah, they're going to hit it
Yeah,
big, but then
yeah.
they never do. And uh, speaking in terms of wrestling, like I'm sure there's plenty of people that you worked with locally or you were a fan of coming up, and oh yeah, they're gonna, like now they're gonna get signed to WWE, they're gonna get signed to AEW. But back then it was probably even easier to, fly under the radar because there was no social media.
Well, I mean, I mean, if you look at, let's say, Luther in AEW, and
Hmm.
that's a perfect example of a guy who had all the tools and did all the work, and it just never happened for him until he was in this advanced stage of his career. Luther could be in this movie if you were talking about it in a wrestling sense. Never got a national TV contract, and last week he kicks off the show cutting a promo on Brody and getting his head stuffed in the cake, and he's kind of one of the stars of the show. I mean, that doesn't happen, but it did for him. And the same thing with Siren. And when I called it, I'm too old for this shit, I knew at some point somebody in the band would say I'm too old for this shit, because traveling across the world to play a show, it's not easy. Even just figuring out how to get to the airport and where do you get your gear and where do you put your guitars and where's the drums and all this other stuff. And so I said to Nathan, I guarantee someone's going to say that. And I remember we were texting back and forth there in Germany. Dude, he just said I'm too old for this shit. A couple of days, they said it again. So now we could obviously get them to say it, but they actually naturally said it. Yeah. And that to me is the sentiment of this movie. I'm too old for this shit. This is way beyond what I was expecting. But yet the guys pulled it off. And another cool thing about this documentary that I really liked was most great documentaries kind of base themselves on archival footage. Like if you're going to watch, I don't know, the Peter Jackson Let It Be documentary that's coming out, I'm sure it's going to be amazing. But all this stuff is footage that was filmed 50 years ago. Our movie, yes, we had the archival footage that we needed, but this movie was being filmed in real time. So when the bass player Greg constantly disappears, where's Greg? That's a story that you never expected. Mm-hmm. When the singer loses his passport for 10 minutes and thinks it got stolen and finds it in the pocket of his jacket, like this is great stuff. That's real life things that actually happen to people when you're traveling. Combine that with the fact that now they have to go play this show and everything's all kind of on the line. I love the fact that the final scene of this movie is the guys on stage after playing this kick-ass show in front of 5,000 people who are chanting Siren and singing all their lyrics, and they got the crowd behind them, they got their hands in the air, and you can just see this look of wonderment and passion and gratification and magic in their faces. And they look like 18-year-old kids, even though they're in their 50s. And that to me is the magic of rock and roll. And it's the magic of having a dream. And it finally came true for them.
Yeah. And watching it, I kept thinking like something's going to go wrong. Something's going to go wrong but to finally see it pay off like that, it was really inspiring. Yeah. And, that wasn't their dream anymore. You hear so often, like, don't give up on your dreams, but they had lives, they moved on, and somebody else found them and pulled them back into it. Right. So I thought that was just such a really cool aspect of it.
Yeah, like you said too, the kind of the kind of the brilliance of the internet. It's like somebody was, hey, are you Ed, the drummer from Siren? It seemed like the universe kind of pulled it together because they had all these different people emailing from Brazil and the Soviet Union and here they're like, why is everybody emailing us at the same time? Which caused them to kind of have a reconciliation. And then right after that, they get this call to do this festival. So it seems like whatever, kismet there is was definitely at work for this band. And like I said, I mean, when I first heard about this, I thought, okay, this is going to be just a shit show. Like I said, it's just going to be a disaster. But what a terribly depressing movie that would have been if that's what happened. We have enough of those kind of, strikes and gutters to make an interesting story, but the real beauty of the movie is that it worked and it did come true for those guys. And like I said, after we edited it and put it together, I'm like, it doesn't matter if you, like I said earlier, if you like rock and roll or not, this is just a story that'll it'll bring a tear to your eye, because here's some legit nice guys that through no fault of their own kind of gave up on this dream. And 30 years later, it tapped them on the back and said, here's your chance. And they took the ball and ran with it, so to speak.
Yeah. One of the other things I really appreciated was you actually explained it. I wrote down the quote because I thought it was just so appropriate. And you said in Germany, it's still leather pants, leather jacket with the cutoff jean jacket over the top, long hair, studs, heavy metal, heavy metal is fucking life. Like,
Yeah.
it's like this culture shift that we're not used to. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I looked it up because I was going to try to be clever, but I mean, no,
We lost you in your background.
my green screen won't show it, but I'm like sitting there. I'm like, you just described 2002 era Triple H. Like, but that's like current for them. And it's not a gimmick. It's like, they just,
No.
like, what is it about Europe over there?
When I said heavy metal is fucking life, I mean, heavy fucking metal. If you don't like heavy metal, you're not my friend. And that is the real attitude. And it's just the way that it is in a lot of places in Europe. And that's why, like, another thing that's why I wanted to explain just how important heavy metal is to these people. When you get some of the guys saying Siren is forever. I live my life for Siren. Siren is better than Iron Maiden. If I had the chance to hear Bruce Dickinson or Doug from Siren, I would take Doug from Siren. These guys saying that's no just throwaway quote. These guys live, eat, breathe heavy metal. So for them to accept Siren the way they do, and the festival they played in is a very, you got to be a real heavy metal fan to go. There's no Alice Cooper at this festival. There's no Metallica at this festival. This is fucking Metal Church and Flotsam and Jetsam and Raven. And here's Siren right in the middle of it. And like I said, the fact that they had this fan base that knew all of their words and were there to see their show, explaining what it's like in those countries, that's a big deal. So to me, even that was like, oh my gosh, like they went over there and they kicked ass. They went over huge. They got over big time in this area where if you don't play it, keep it true is the name of the festival. If you're not keeping it true, they're going to sniff you out and boo you off the stage. So all of those things I wanted to explain. This is not just some show. This is the most hardcore of heavy metal fans at the most hardcore of heavy metal festivals with the most hardcore of heavy metal bands, and Siren came right in there and fit in perfectly.
I encourage everybody to check it out. You can get it on Amazon digital outlets. I'm too old for this shit. Heavy Metal Fairy Tale. You're definitely going to learn a lot. You're going to find a band that pretty much nobody knew existed, and they got another shot at stardom. So that's really cool.
You'll laugh, you'll cry.
It's fun. But in closing, kind of wanted to get your ear about Dynamite last week, and what'd you think of the Inner Circle brouhaha? Like, how are you guys doing? What'd you think of teaming with MJF?
I think what really came out is the story. I mean, the MJF Jericho Inner Circle story, believe it or not, started September 4th, I believe. So here we are 5 months in, September, October, November, December, January, 5 months in already. And it's still just heating up. So I love it. I love the storytelling that we're doing, the long-term, tales that we're telling. And that's one thing I love about AEW is nothing is done just to do it. Everything fits the next, to where you can always go back and go, oh my gosh, there's the signs for what happened 5 weeks later. It started here. Those were the seeds where they were planted. So I love it. I love the idea of the Inner Circle, kind of the three-way tag team match. I did a huge rating, which is great. But more importantly, it was a great story that we're telling that continues on. This week it will continue and for the foreseeable future. So it's exciting for me, man. I've always been more into the characters and the stories behind wrestling than the actual matches themselves. And I think we're doing a great job of really setting the standard of what great pro wrestling storytelling is.
And I remember around that time I don't remember the exact quote, but you said that you believe Inner Circle's strong enough to stand the test of time, and then you see it almost being like a DX style stable where you're going to be around for years and years, and whether you agreed with it or not at the time, you guys are proving it. Like, you're mixing it up, you're making the story interesting. It's not just, oh well, I thought it was going to go this way and it veered off, and we got some great stuff.
I mean, nobody ever knows. Nobody ever knows for sure. I mean, people always say, "Oh yeah, we knew this or knew that." No, you don't. You don't know anything until it happens. And if you look back from October 2nd, 2019, the Inner Circle stories have always been one of the best on the show every single week. And even to the point where the only story that we ever had that really kind of took a turn is when we smashed Nick Jackson's head under the garage door March 11th in Salt Lake City. And then that was our last live show, and everything else got canceled. We were all kind of building up towards Rochester on the 18th, and then Blood and Guts on the 25th in New Jersey. That got taken away, so we had to regroup. But had we not had the pandemic take that away, there probably wouldn't have been a stadium stampede, which to me is still one of the greatest moments in pro wrestling history. So you take what you're given and morph and work your way around it and continue to build. And that's one thing I think AEW's done in spite of the pandemic, in spite of not being in front of, I mean, thank goodness we're in front of crowds now, even though the smaller ones, but for 6 months we had no crowd really, but we still put on great programming. And the stories we've told, I mean, if you look from Jericho Cody to Jericho Moxley to Inner Circle versus the Elite, then going to Jericho versus Orange Cassidy, and now Jericho MJF and the Inner Circle, like it always makes sense and it always leads to the next thing and always intertwines. And I take great pride in that. So it's exciting for me to see every week how the story unfolds. And I always say, like, when I go to a movie, I don't want to know what the beginning, middle, and ending is. I want you to surprise me and see it kind of unfold the way that the director and the storytellers want it to unfold. So when people always try and guess what's going on, and maybe one week they'll bury something because they didn't like what happened or whatever, it's like it's just one part of the story. Here's the story. Here's each week. One scene leads to the next. So, but I think our fan base knows that. I think that's why our numbers continue to grow. Demo God is no joke. Our demos are through the roof. I know that our TV partner is very happy with it, and we're kind of looked upon as the cool wrestling company, the cutting edge wrestling company, and that's exactly what we are.
You are certainly proving you are not too old for this shit when it comes to the ring.
Good segue.
Check them out, AEW Dynamite, every week on TNT. Check out the documentary, digital outlets. I'm too old for this shit. Chris Jericho, thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, Bill. Talk to you soon, man.